Hello. Welcome to my first podcast. Today's guest is Anthony Jones. Anthony's a former roommate of mine who now works as a software developer for the semiconductor company Micron. I met Anthony during my first semester in college. He wasn't then my roommate, but he liked to hang out with my other roommate and I, and eventually came to sleep on the floor of our cramped little dorm with no windows, and he has since become one of my best friends. This was recorded a handful of months ago, somewhat ad hoc and impromptu, so the quality of the recording isn't all that it could or should be. The same can be said for the rest of this first batch of episodes, but it's my hope that you will stick with me as I continue to practice and improve with regards to my technical knowledge and conversational ability. I have large ambitions for this podcast and won't be able to achieve them without somewhat stupidly, blindly stumbling along at first. All of that said, LLC, and I hope you enjoy. So Anthony, how's it going? Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. What's the name?
Probably just the Michael Collins podcast. I'm still working out some of the...
I have always wanted to be on the Michael Collins podcast.
I appreciate that. It's taken a lot for me to get here, so I'm sure you appreciate me letting you on. All the reach that I have thus far attained.
I've heard a lot about you.
Yeah. You watch a lot of podcasts? I don't know how much we've talked about that.
Yeah, you mentioned, like, I know Joe Rogan podcast. It's pretty good. I know Lex Luthor podcast. He comes up on YouTube clips. I'll hear him, Lex, I hear people call him Lex, so I knew his name was Lex.
Gotcha.
The other podcasts I listen to are just like comedy like they're casual format. They're not really conversations. I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I think podcasts are usually better than other media for me.
Why do you say that? What's interesting about podcasts? Because you said there's a conversation type, so you can break it, as far as I can tell, break down podcasts into dialogues and conversation, and something more relaxed, or the more formal ones where they're telling a story or it's more informational, something like that. So what about podcasts particularly appeal to you?
Sure, I think you did break it down well, that there are podcasts that are dramatic and there are podcasts that are informational. I think when I want to gain information and when am I reading a podcast or listening to a podcast? It's when I want to read a book but I don't have the effort. You have like audiobooks and you have podcasts. I think an audiobook is kind of like a podcast. It's just an author talking to himself, really, right?
Sure.
So what I appreciate about podcasts is usually the ones that I listen to is there's a consistency, so I don't have to care about the authorship, really. You really get to pick out who's going to be that author for you. And then there's still that, even the comedy podcasts I listen to, which are more serious, they give you avenues for information in a lighthearted way.
Do you have an example of something that you...
Yeah, there's one called Sawbones.
Sawbones?
Yeah, so there's a podcast network that I like. Maximum Fun Network. Maximum Fun Network. Okay. It's very popular, apparently. I'm not a patron or whatever, though, so I consume all their stuff for free.
Sure.
But they have some podcasts where it's like the comedians cracking jokes. Like that's a staple in the podcasting world. Right. But several of them have made separate podcasts where they do their own niche thing. For example, Sawbones, they're talking about medical history in a lighthearted way. So at the end of the podcast, you'd be like, oh, I gained some new bit of knowledge. Oh, I now know how the heart valve works, or whatever is the random topic.
Is it more of a conversation like what we're having now, or is it something scripted?
Yes, and so one of them is playing the informant, really, the one who's done the research, and the other one is playing off of that energy. Okay. So they're husband and wife. So the husband will say, oh, tell me more about this. But obviously he knows the information as well. He really makes it entertaining. Sure. But the wife is a doctor and she makes it informing. Okay. Now, I think what kind of, like, you can watch a documentary, for example. That'd be entertaining and informing. But there's no sense of being there having a conversation with a documentary. It seems like you're supposed to not be there. Like, you're getting a sense of something you would not be experiencing normally. So I think the experiential part of a podcast is what's particularly engaging compared to other medium forms.
Just that it's spontaneous and they're riffing off one another in real time, so that when you're experiencing it, it kind of feels more authentic and that you're right there. Does that seem reasonable?
True, that's a good example. I don't think it matters how they achieve it. I think a podcast by nature is supposed to be more experiential. In my experience, it's like, why consume a podcast versus a video, Or videos are podcasts. It's like, what draws the line between a video of two people talking and a podcast?
Sure.
I think a podcast is supposed to be experienced more like a conversation. At least that's the ones I listen to. I know there are podcasts that are just dramatic. It's probably not like that. They just narrate a story, like the Serial podcast. It's supposed to be like melodramatic entertainment.
Yeah, I know there are popular podcasts that are like that. I've just never watched them really myself, so I'm more familiar with stuff like this. Like
you ever listen to podcasts without watching them?
Yeah, of course. Especially if I'm driving or something like that.
I seldom watch any, even like Joe Rogan ones. It's, you can see the recordings on Spotify. I have Spotify.
Yeah.
I still listen to it.
No, there isn't so much to be gained from just watching the camera go back and forth between two characters. It's not like there isn't. People do communicate a lot just through hand gesticulations and facial expressions and whatnot, and every now and then they'll put on their video that they'll watch or something like that. But no, for the most part, conversations are definitely just audio that's supposed to be experienced.
Time out.
Yeah, generally. So it seems like you have watched some podcasts, listened to some podcasts rather, but it does seem to be more of the conversational stuff, and I that's generally the camp that I fall into as well.
How do you imagine most people listen to podcasts? Do you think it's the same as us?
How? Yeah, I think it's generally when people are driving to commute to work. On this last road trip that I was on, I was going to all these big cities and getting stuck in rush hour traffic. I just can't believe how much time people waste in their car just commuting. An hour, 2 hours getting to work, going through all that traffic, going through all that stressed out traffic, killing yourself 10 years younger than you would otherwise, while wasting all that time. Like, you could go spend it with your kids or something like that. But the advantage of something like podcasts and audiobooks and whatnot is that now that becomes downtime. Now you can go listen to an audiobook or a lecture or a podcast or whatever and get a college degree while you're commuting. Rather than turning it into just wasted time.
It matters a lot how you extract that information. For example, maybe I'm listening to a podcast, even the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm listening with a closed ear. It's just white noise. I think that's something very common for how most people consume podcasts.
I think I don't know how most people consume podcasts, but I take your point that there is a sense where people just turn on televisions to have white noise in the background while they're doing anything else. They're not paying attention to it whatsoever. So that might be true. I think that's. I try to give people more credit than that, especially if you are driving or doing the laundry or something like that. I think there's more of a tendency to listen in, but I could be wrong. I'm not so convinced that the populace is listening to long Stanford quality lectures whenever they're doing the laundry all the time, just based on my interactions with normal everyday people. So it's not that I have anything against normal everyday people. People often have better things to do than listening to molecular biology lectures on stuff they'll never use. But I'm inclined to say that they listen more. Maybe.
Or more importantly, it's kind of hard to downplay the fact that colleges are needed for a reason. It's not just having the information of those courses available. It's also having someone to guidance through that information.
Sure.
You could show me all the math in the world, all in one room, like a library. Say, here's the math, physical math, here's abstract geometrical math. Here's all the math that we know. But if I don't have the tools to interpret and use it, it's void. I think in that area, a podcast can be more rewarding than simply extracting information for mindfulness sake. Because you also get along with the information, what to do with it. I mean, a good podcast will say what to do with it. They'll make it interesting. They'll
contextualize it.
Exactly. So in comedy podcasts I listen to, the framing device basically for the comedy is that they have users give you questions and that they're going to answer the questions in a comedic way, entertaining way, but they call it an advice podcast, you know, because they want to give you advice. It's very tongue-in-cheek. So you might be thinking, oh, what's the, like, you know, these are just usually very mild things like you would not think are funny. They provide you a perspective to enjoy that, which there are questions that maybe I say, oh, I need advice, that plays into myself, and then they really give you an avenue to think and appreciate that without anyone else being involved, which is very interesting.
When you say anyone else being involved, who would be the anyone else?
Well, if I need advice, I'd have to go to someone else. I'd have to go to a friend or a colleague or something. And it's not really like that. That's not really the relationship. It's not like they're actually trying to give you genuine advice. And it's not like the premise is I should actually be asking them for advice. The point is that there are things that you should talk about, like things that you do need advice for. All the questions they answer, they are questions that don't have immediate, obvious answers, right? But they provide you a perspective that's approachable. You know, if maybe I have this concern, I don't go to everyone with it, but they come to you prepackaged and something that can make you laugh and also make you think about life. I think that's what a lot of podcasts that are consumed. There are a lot of people talking about life in a prepackaged way. I think it's not sufficient. Like, I have a podcast that I listen to, which is just an information dump. It's a podcast about Persia, right? It talks about Persian history. It's done by one real Persian. It's not very popular. And I think about that podcast, and I listened to maybe 4 episodes of it, and they got too dry. And I'd rather read some Persian information than listen to a podcast about it. Yeah. It's because he didn't package a convenient way to listen to it. Now, if you contrast that against another podcast I recommend, Hardcore History, same deal. He dumps a lot of information at you. But
is that the Dan Carlin one?
Exactly. He always packages it in a really beautiful way. One that keeps going the more you listen to these things. Because he will always say, oh, I don't think this way, or I don't concern myself with this way. Or he gives you the context. He says either this is really affecting people. He really builds into the emotional appeal. When he was talking about slavery, he kept hitting the note of, it's unimagineable, but it happened. We have to talk about it.
When you say slavery, you mean the Atlantic slave trade?
Yes, okay. Specifically Atlantic slave trade, which was very bad. Very economic, very impactful. I say you can't just say it's not like 9/11, which you can say 9/11 has political, religious undertones, but it's a terrorist attack. You can take that perspective and really just sit with it. But the Atlantic slave trade, it was also very bad for the human condition. It was vital for economy and the progress. He goes through a lot of, I think he actually talks about the Atlantic slave trade, but like many years of history, like all the way down to American colonization and American slavery. So when you get the whole context of how these slaves were treated, how slaves, I think he was talking about an island, he was talking about Haiti, I think, which was massively enslaved. And it's like, okay, you're the Haiti island. How do you, A, get out of slavery when you're slaves? And B, if you're an enslaver, how do you even maintain that? You're in an island where you're outnumbered 10-1. You might have rifles, but how do you keep sustaining it? And how, as a human being, do you justify sustaining it? Sure. That's something you can't just go to your coworker and start talking about. It provides you that perspective, and most people, they don't have the credentials to talk about it in a meaningful way. So it also provides the information. I think that's something that's less popular when it comes to podcasts. I think most people don't go to podcasts to learn something. I think a podcast, all the popular ones I see are comedy podcasts or celebrities who got famous by other means, and now they have a podcast. Even Joe Rogan. I don't think his podcast caught on until he became more of a celebrity as a comedian and on X Factor. So,
are you sure about that? I think the podcast. I mean, not that I know a lot, but it seems like it came about more independently.
It came about more independently, but he got successful not from his podcast initially.
For sure.
He got successful, met people, got an audience who then helped him build his podcast. Because I just don't think podcasts are a friendly format for most people. I think most people, if they do go branch out into podcasts for the first time, they're going to want a familiar face in the scene, a celebrity they know, or a recommendation. You know, it's not something...
It has the brand name NPR or something.
It's not like Netflix, and the podcast app is not like Netflix. You don't really... It's not easy to search for what you like. When I know, I'm interested in math. I want to hear podcasts talking about complicated maths. Does that exist? Probably not. You know, it's like, it's not saturated. The market is not it is deeply saturated, but it's not actually properly saturated with rich, diverse topics, when it really could be. Like, when you think about what some people get out of podcasts, you know, it shouldn't be a huge barrier to set up. There should be more scientists talking freely in a podcast form about their scientific work. But there's just not a market for that, I think, really.
You don't think so?
I think you don't make money with it, is what I should say.
Well, yeah, to back up your point, I mean, I can go online and find lectures from Nobel laureates who they have like 100 views, something like that. And that just blows my mind. It seems like if you want, like, in principle, if I just keep working at this, then I can call them up and say, hey, do you have an hour or two to talk, something like that. You know, I'm inclined to say that there is a market for it. It's just that people just haven't filled it yet. I mean, that's to argue your point. Like I said, it seems like there's stuff out there already, but I also don't think that people have I think I was sort of alluding to this earlier today, that if you're trying to figure out how to get into photography, for example, then it seems like you got to find a way to crack it. You got to find a photographer that you like, and that they actually are prominent, and there's enough written about them so that you can go and read what's written about them and maybe what's written from them, and then find out people who they've influenced and who've influenced them. But to figure out where to go and who's trustworthy when you don't know anything about, say, photography or, say, the Atlantic slave trade or something like that, then it just seems like uncertainty and anxiety, and you just don't know how to deal with that whatsoever. But if I can work my way through all of that, I bet you I can fill that market need. I'm inclined to say that people want that and will listen to it if you make it. That's what you're saying. Make it more approachable. So in The Republic, Plato makes an argument that the truth, that you need to have a noble eye to control the people. That Plato was very, very skeptical of democracy. The notion that you could just have truth and people will follow it. That's what killed Socrates, right? It's that mob rule of whatever it was, 56 to 100. Socrates gets to die even though he was innocent by... He was definitely innocent, I want to say, by all accounts, because people definitely didn't like him, but he was innocent, despite that democracy killed him. So there's this relationship that Plato has to tease out between rhetoric and the truth. Is that rhetoric has to serve the truth, right? Plato kicks out the poets from the Republic, but eventually invites them back in, so long as that they're helping to, so long as they're serving the good. Like Plato famously does not like Homer as a consequence. Most of Homer has to kind of be stripped down so that you're only teaching the youth all the good bits of Homer. Everything else.
What was bad about Homer? Like bad morals?
Yeah.
In Homer?
Too much killing, too much in pursuit of honor, not in pursuit of the good to say. And we can't have that to happen.
So what if you have someone that has a wavering sense of good?
What do you mean by wavering?
You have someone who doesn't have an absolute sense of good. You know, like a divinity or a core experience that grounds them to something good. Yep. Someone like a prisoner who has been through judgment, but hasn't found anything to ground themselves in, doesn't have to be a prisoner. Anyone who just doesn't have a strong concept of truth. Do you still think they bend a lot to rhetoric, that they could be misguided by rhetoric these days? That rhetoric might be more important to them than truth?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's true for a lot of people. I'm not so convinced that people aren't. I'm not so convinced that people believe in good and evil anymore. I think we're
when you say rhetoric, you mean along the sense of like authority.
That could be part of it. Part of it would just be word games that you play so that it makes it seem like you know what you're talking about when you don't. So one example would be, I lay out a proposition. I mean, this is kind of a cheap example, but it still falls within the pathological aspects of rhetoric in this particular category. I make a claim that if you push on it a little bit, wouldn't make any sense, it would fall apart immediately. But rather than letting you poke at it, I quickly move on to the next object in the conversation, and then it just seems awkward if you go back and we've already moved on to the next thing. Something like that. That's a good example of rhetoric over truth, say. That if we're having this dialogue, we're not pursuing truth, we're pursuing power games, or we're pursuing me dominating you and winning, or something like that. Something that isn't the truth.
It seems a little paradoxical, though, because by analogy, what you just described is maybe we're playing a game, we're wrestling for control in the conversation.
Yeah.
Why might we be playing that game? Well, maybe we both have perceptions of truth, and like you said, the rhetoric involved is very important on presenting on the measure of that truth, right?
Sure.
So for me to be more true, I have to also be more in control of what that truth means. I have to be more in control of the conversation and the context that we have, which to me seems a very natural and understandable thing.
Well, if the object of my podcast is to relate the truth to the audience, then it would seem that would be the best thing to do. Would be, okay, I invite you on, you're a nice scientist, and I know some about your work, and I just direct the conversation so as to extract from you the knowledge that I already know, so that it can be presented in the best possible manner to the audience. But I think a much more interesting way to have a podcast and have a conversation in general is, okay, I bring you on and you have some interesting ideas and maybe some areas that I don't know too much about, and I can poke at you and question you and see if your ideas actually hold up under some scrutiny, and maybe you'll do the same to me, and maybe you'll come up with, maybe I'll poke at you and you'll come up with something new, or maybe I'll poke at you and you'll have an argument that I haven't already encountered, and I'm learning as a consequence of this as well, rather than assuming a priori that I already know the truth. I think that's what a dialogue is. So dialogue, you break it down into via and logos. Logos would be whatever logos is, word, argument, something associated with speech. There's a couple of different. Logos is a hard thing to translate. Something to do with the truth. But via means through. So it's when we're having a conversation, it's something like we're acting through the logos towards the truth, something like that.
Wonder if dia has any etymological link to Dio, which I believe translates as God in Italian.
Yeah, that's Latin. Latin Deus is God. I don't know. It might be a Proto-European type of thing. I wouldn't doubt it, but I'd be more inclined to say. So if you look at the word for Zeus in Greek, the nominative, the subject, if you're using it as a subject, it's Zeus. But if you make it declension, so if I say Zeus did this, you would say Zeus did this. But if I say I gave Zeus, I would say I gave to via Dios. That's, as long as it's not the subject of the sentence, you're using some form of Dios.
How would you know if you said I gave sacrifice to Zeus, or I gave sacrifice to Hades?
Those are two different words. So you would say ton via, ton evi.
So thea is a specific word for Zeus?
Yes. It's another form of the word Zeus.
Oh, it's a grammatical
Yes. So Greek is really weird. You could take all of the words in a sentence, really, and just throw them up in the air and have them in a complete random order, and you can still understand the sentence. So, for example, I gave the rock to Anthony. I, in that case, is not. So we have it a little bit in English. I and me is a good example. I is the subject, that'd be the nominative case. Me would be anything that's not nominative. But accusative, for example. I gave the rock. The rock, in this case, is accusative. In English, we don't change it at all, but if Έδωσα τον Petron. I gave the rock. Petros to Petron is just a change in declension. So that's an accusative form. A dative form would be to Anthony. So I don't know what Anthony is in Greek.
Antonio. That's
I think that's Latin though. Antonio, like Marcus Antonius.
Antone. I see another version of Anthony as like Antoni.
Like I said, that's Antonius is in Latin. So.
Wow, my name is old. I didn't know.
Yeah. Marcus Antonius. He was critical in the Civil War, bringing about the Roman Empire.
Wait, isn't there a Mark Antony? Was like
Mark Antony? Yeah, Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony.
Isn't that the guy in that was with Julius Caesar?
Yep. So
why did you say? Oh, Civil War.
Roman Civil War.
Roman.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes. So Caesar, he starts to amass power in the Republic, and people aren't liking that. He starts to make enemies in the Senate. He enacts the Gallic Wars. So it's about 8 years of him essentially doubling the Roman Empire's territory, moving.
Is it Gallic or Gaelic? I've heard
Gallic, because it's the Gauls, Gauls, Gaul, Gaul, Gaul.
Sounds pretty gay.
Gaelic. I doubt it, because Gaelic seems like it's more like English and Irish and stuff based on.
Are they different? Because I'm thinking of the.
I don't know, because I know the Gauls are also Celtic in origin and not.
Oh yeah, I am thinking of the Gauls, the Celts.
Yep.
I'm just thinking of them. They're a playable race in a Civ game or something.
Sure.
Or actually, not Civ, Age of Empires, probably. I've heard Julius Caesar described as a megalomaniac.
So there's this story when I think he's a teenager at this time. He's captured by pirates. You know the story?
Just briefly, or I don't know at all.
He's captured by pirates, and he's so that he can be ransomed back to his family and whatnot. And he's told the ransom that he's being ransomed for. He said, no, I'm worth more than that. You up that, and they did. And he told them the entire time. They took it as a joke, but he was dead serious. Once I'm released, I'm going to come back and kill all of you. And he would say that. He kind of he had some time with them, obviously. He kind of got on a personal relationship with them, but telling them the whole time, I'm going to come back and kill all of you. They all thought it was ridiculous, but soon enough, once he's released and gets the ransom, he goes back, takes all the pirates, kills them all. He sits with them in their prison cell. So, like I said, he got personal with them, got friendly with them, but until the day he put them to death. Yes, you could say he's a megalomaniac. There are plenty of ways that people like to interpret the Gallic Wars as his attempt at amassing power and popularity in much more populace.
So when people say he's a megalomaniac, they take that as his motivations were self-serving.
That's how many people look at it, yes.
How can you look throughout history and not feel that way for basically all the rulers? Like that. The skeptic in me says, what's so different?
Well, that's kind of like the standard postmodern interpretation, is that people are just in it for self-serving means. And you look at Caesar and you could probably make a claim to that. Maybe you could say he wants to do it for the good of Rome. Maybe for the good of Gaul.
I'll put it another way. I think to meet you in what you had said, it's a modern take or something.
Postmodern, yeah, that's what it means.
I feel rather it's up to the burden of the ruler to prove they're not selfish. Like when you take someone like, and I don't really use this vocabulary because it is oversaturated in society. I think it means too little for what people use it for. But when you have a difference in power, you have the subjugate and the ruler. It takes no effort for the ruler to be successfully selfish. It takes lots of effort to overcome that power.
Yeah.
From the subjugate perspective. And that's not going to happen. They're not going to do that unless there's really a good reason. They're not going to do it selfishly, right? Unless there's a really good reason, like they can support another ruler by doing it who has promised them something better. But when you look at a ruler, it's just like, I cannot imagine being raised as a ruler with so much power over people who are so much weaker, and you understand that there's a huge burden on you to be a benevolent ruler. Okay. Like, in other words, it would have to be, like when I put myself in those shoes, I wouldn't be benevolent. I would be good, right? I would do good things. I would be a megalomaniac, probably.
Can you make those distinctions a little clearer for me?
Yeah, like, I do lots of good things. I give homeless people money sometimes. I volunteer time. I donate to charity. I provide for friends and family. All those things, I feel good about doing it. I don't have to question doing it because I get something out of doing it.
Okay.
And,
as opposed to doing something because it's your duty to do so. That's what you're pointing to as benevolence?
Yeah. So for me, so if you came to me and you said, I think you're a selfish person, I would say that sounds about right. If you said I'm a megalomaniac, I'd say probably that doesn't sound right. A megalomaniac is so selfish in my mind that they're so self-important that they risk their what's good so that they can get what they need. I don't think I do that, but I think I'm selfish. I think that I have to prove how I'm not selfish, and I can't do that. I can't come to you and say I naturally lose sleep at night every day thinking about the troubles in the world. It causes me to want to go and do these things. I know those people exist, and it doesn't take a lot to prove that you're not selfish. It takes consistency mostly, but so when I look at the context of these rulers, and it's like, okay, we're not talking about being selfish. I think all the rulers, to some degree, like, it's just a ruler is a non-optimal equilibrium where now everyone involved, they keep playing the structure correctly, they all benefit from it, but it's out of self-interest. It's like the ruler gets to be a ruler, but he also has a lot of responsibilities, and he's probably the first to die whenever the ruler goes to the next ruler, and there's that kind of stuff. When I think of someone being a good ruler, I think of someone that does good for their citizens. And I can oppose this as an example of a bad ruler, like Bloody Mary or whatever.
Who's that? Can you just, I don't know.
Queen Elizabeth? But her name's Mary. I don't know why she's bloody.
I don't know.
The one that killed everyone because she changed the rules of Protestantism. She's named you don't know about Bloody Mary, like the game people play?
I'm pretty sure someone's explained it to me at some point in time, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
All right, so she was so bad to her people that she got the moniker.
Nickname.
Bloody Mary, which you might know because people play blood. You know the game Bloody Mary, right? It's like a witch tale now. It's like you go into the bathroom when it's dark and you say Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. It's because that's how people felt over her rule, that she would kill anyone. She would kill she would kill Protestants for not being Protestant enough according to the rules. Okay. And she would also kill non-Protestants for not being Protestant. She started beheading people and like killing people over wanted religious supremacy, and it was, by many accounts, she was a saint, like a very holy person, but she was bad to her people. Now, when I think, did she do that for a selfish reason? Probably not. She was probably very much believing that was the proper way society should be held. You need to be Protestant for whatever reason. The point is, it was to her own detriment, likely, to be doing those rules. She probably did not benefit a lot. I don't think she became a better, more popular ruler. I don't think she gained more control in a meaningful way. She was still a bad ruler, even though she was not maybe selfish with that rule. So there's this. So, it's a burden to really prove that you are benevolent. I feel like I can't even think off the top of my head a benevolent ruler. It's like a fairy tale. It's like when I watch a show and you have a ruler who actually cares for their people. It feels like a fairy. Now I know I'm watching fiction.
Sure. Well, to argue against that, it seems like Pericles, who was ruled in the golden age of Athens, seems like he was a pretty good ruler. He's, despite sort of ruling as an autocrat, although the Athenian government was more complicated than just a democracy, and it definitely wasn't an autocracy, but he sort of ruled as an autocrat going into the Peloponnesian War and was very popular despite that.
And his enemies give the same, here's another thing that a friend of mine is very, very, very much a skeptic of. The older back you go, he's more of a skeptic of what that is, of what's being accounted there as being true. I tend to agree. Dan Carlin will also give this warning. When you get really old, like biblical old, you only have a few authors describing a person. Who knows if they're biased or not? One good way, I don't know who said this, but I took it somewhere, is that if your enemies are saying, "Oh, this guy was also he was a decent guy," he was probably a decent guy.
Sure.
But if his allies who they both betrayed and completely eradicated a war is saying, "Oh, he's the best guy, he would never," then you have a reason to doubt. So in other words, I agree that there has to be numerous rulers who were benevolent. I think people are benevolent, and rulership is not outside of concern. I think it's a huge burden to prove. Why? Well, there's not a lot of information to go off of, first of all. And I think the burden rests on, if you're going to call yourself one of the greats, like I was good to people, you have to really prove it. It's not something that you can just say, I was a good ruler, I didn't kill anyone. It's like, okay, great.
I take your point.
And I don't think you can really do that in terms of being a successful ruler. I think you can be benevolent, but then if your next spawn isn't ready to go to war because people are taking advantage of you for being benevolent, then you're going to get taken advantage of and you're going to fall out of time. It's like...
What do you make of Marcus Aurelius then? He's often regarded as the last great Roman emperor. And
I don't know enough about Roman. I don't know enough about Marcus.
The Roman emperor is Marcus Aurelius?
Mm-mm.
He's sort of the principal Stoic everybody likes to read nowadays.
I don't even know much about Stoicism.
Yeah.
But I know a little bit that the Stoics it opposes hedonism. They push against the idea that that bodily interests are of vital importance. It's more so. It's much more the idea of I'm going to make myself into a noble person or a nobly possessed person, a person of good ideology.
They're largely modeled after Socrates. And do you know anything about Socrates as a person?
Seemed boring.
He liked to go around poking at people and seeing if they actually knew anything, if they actually knew what they were talking about.
Do you think Socrates would say that everyone has something useful that they know? Does he think that knowledge has to be earned?
I don't know if does knowledge have to be earned? Well, part of the reason I'm having a little trouble responding is because it's tough to make the distinction between Plato and Socrates. So to say that Socrates would say that knowledge has to be earned, I would say if you claim to have knowledge, then Socrates would definitely say you had better have some evidence to suggest that you can make the right to that claim. because what Socrates did was ask people if they had poke at people to see what they knew, because he was told that he was the wisest man in all of Athens, and he wanted to figure out why the heck why would someone say that about him? Why the Oracle of Delphi of all people would say it about him? So he would poke at people and poke at it.
Is that a person? Oracle of Delphi?
Oracle of
I thought it was a building.
So where was it? Oh, it's Delphi's a place. And she had, I don't remember the exact name of the place that she was in. I don't think it was the Temple of Apollo. I know that's in Delphi, but she had her own little abode there, and she was a soothsayer. So people from all over Greece would go and ask her questions, and she'd give generally cryptic responses. Saying,
Did she say she claimed she could see the future?
Yes.
No, I feel like that's not true. So how did she get popular? Did she actually give true?
Well, I don't know what you want.
I mean, the people gave claims that she told their futures?
So what she would often say would be something like, okay, so I'm asking you, I have this business decision. Do I close my business, or do I start up a new one, or do I move jobs or whatever? And she would say something like, the wind falls farther in the south, stuff like that. So when Socrates' enemies go to the Oracle of Delphi asking is there any man wiser than Socrates, they expect to get some cryptic answer like that, and then misinterpret.
She's like, no, he's damn smart.
Exactly. She said, no, he is the wisest man in all of Athens, and that's not the answer she normally gives. She normally gives.
Had she met Socrates? Because that's crazy to just say straight up.
I don't know. I assume she's at least heard of Socrates. His name got around, and he was a weirdo. To do generally, if you're a philosopher, you go outside of Athens to do philosophy. All the pre-Socratics they went out of the city. Socrates brings philosophy into the Agora. The Agora is like the city square market area, and
why? What was the reason? Was it frowned upon to do philosophy in Athens?
I should know the answer to that. I don't. It's probably something like you have to go out into the desert, into chaos, into the unknown to get the wisdom.
Socrates did not write his own stuff. So how did he serve? Was he a military man early in life? How did he gain his status?
Well, he gained his status because not everyone, a lot of people grew to hate him. So when I'm saying that people, he would get people to see if they knew anything. He'd go up to a carpenter or something like that and ask them about, see what they know. And oftentimes they know how to make a chair, and they know how to make a table, and they do it really well. And that's knowledge they definitely claim to have and actually did have. But then you poke at them about philosophy, and all of a sudden it's spew nonsense that they claim to have and they definitely don't have. So people don't like that when you poke at, you ask questions, and they start to realize that, all of these things that I think I know actually don't know. So he started making enemies that way. He'd go to the poets and see if they had any knowledge. And it didn't seem like the poets actually knew anything. It seemed like they knew things through inspiration. So they would come up with their grand poems and whatnot, and then write it down, but it's not like they really knew exactly what it is they were writing, nor could they really understand it, interpret it properly. So even though they claimed otherwise. So in that sense, they're also...
So a person who didn't claim that they were knowledgeable.
That's Socrates. The one man who claimed he knew nothing, who knew that he knew nothing.
Was it just... I feel like knowledge can't be... The way I'm thinking of knowledge can't be the way that these people were claiming to know things. Because it's like... Knowledge, as I imagine it, is such a weak word now. And... Like, let's say I know something, right? Mm-hmm. I tell you I know how to do this. I know how. I know what. I know, I'll know if I know it. And I'll also know if I don't know it, right? The state of knowledge is a self-contained conviction.
Well, I'll argue against that. So there's a dialogue called the Euthyphro. And it's about... There are two things that Socrates is accused of. One is corrupting youth, the other is impiety. So this is a dialogue about what is piety. There's this guy, Euthyphro. He's accusing his father of murder.
So real quick, did Socrates, he was actually accused. He said, hold on, let me have a talk. Did he actually have a dialogue, or how does he convey this dialogue in response?
Remember, this is Plato, so this is...
But Socrates was actually accused of corrupting the youth and actually accused of impiety. So what are you supposed to believe? He actually had this conversation as well?
This particular one about the Euthyphro, generally, I mean, you gotta realize that Plato was absolutely
okay. Well, let me phrase it another way. Socrates was definitely doing something with his thoughts, right? He wasn't writing them down,
right?
So if not actually talking to people, that implies to me, if he didn't, he has all these dialogues. If he didn't actually talk to people this way, he must have been telling people he had these talks or something. Like there's some format that he was relating this information.
No, he was doing it in this manner. He was poking people, just asking questions to see if they actually knew anything.
So the same awful to read, like difficult to understand dialogues I'm reading. He just went up to laymen and were like asking these same questions to them.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, once again, you gotta realize Plato was absolutely a poet and a real genius. So if you take the dialogue, the Symposium, for example, this is like a story on a story on a story. Plato is telling us the story of the Symposium, but Plato himself is hearing this from Apollodorus, and Apollodorus has heard this from Aristodemus.
This is all written in the...
This is written in the text, yes.
Okay.
And Aristodemus was there at this party, the Symposium, but he didn't really have any dialogue there. He was just a minor person there. And the Symposium itself is a bunch of speeches, including a speech that Socrates gives. And the speech that Socrates gives isn't really a speech. It's his relay of a conversation that he had with this lady Diotima. So it's like a story within the story, within the story, within the story.
And does it seem natural when you read it? Does it seem like it naturally would have happened that way? Like there's a good element of truth?
Oh yeah. Well,
good fiction seems natural, I would say.
In some sense, yes. But in some sense, like you read the Symposium, and all of the speeches that are being told are building on one another. And when Socrates has a conversation with Diotima, what Diotima is telling Socrates is also in response to all the other speeches that are laid out in this party that's happening in principle after this conversation with Diotima. So make no mistake, the Platonic dialogues are carefully curated, and everything is absolutely meticulously written. There's nothing out of place. There's no way any of this, without divine intervention, there's no way any of this actually happened explicitly the way Plato writes it. Well, Plato, a good example, Crito. Crito is, once Socrates imprisoned, there's a friend of his, Crito, who comes along for a couple days and has a conversation with Socrates, trying to convince him to run town and escape his death. The dialogue, Crito, is just one conversation where you're condensing whatever it is, the 12 days that Socrates is in prison, you're distilling it into the principle of this dialogue, of this one conversation. So it's not explicit. Generally, you could probably say, yeah, he had this conversation with the guy, Crito. Yeah, he had a conversation with, maybe you could say the Euthyphro. I mean, some of these things are a little harder to tease out because it was so long ago, and Plato began writing dialogues 12 years after Socrates died too. So it's probably something.
What was Plato doing in the meantime?
A lot of traveling. I don't know exactly what it all was, but I imagine a lot of learning, a lot of, like, Plato was...
You mean to say he didn't publish his writings? He was probably writing in the meeting.
He didn't write until he published it.
Wow. That's a good memory. Or a good imagination.
Socrates was very dear to Plato. Yes, Socrates is very dear to Plato. So when he died, that really sucked.
Did Socrates or Plato have any love interests?
Yeah, Socrates was famously a horrible husband and father.
So he had kids?
Yes, he had 2 kids, I think. Well, that's one of the cool things about the Apology, which is it doesn't translate as apology. It translates apologia, translates as defense. That's a better translation. But it's Socrates' defense before the Athenian court, defending himself on the accusations of impiety and corrupting the youth. And one of the last things he says before the court is that I know you guys are putting me to death for this, for poking at all of you and making sure that you guys don't claim unearned knowledge. But despite the fact that you all hate me for this, even though you're going to put me to death, please do this to my kids. Make sure that you keep them in check and that they make no claims to unearned knowledge. Which, you read that, when I read that, I was just blown away that you could be so confident that you're doing the good, that you actually are, and wish that for your kids, despite the fact that they're hating the people that you've done this to, are hating you for it so much that they're going to kill you for it, and you want that for your kids.
I can't really imagine what it has to be a political hate. They hate what you're doing to the system. How can you take
Socrates didn't really, well, he had influence. So to take your point, Socrates...
Was he mean?
No. I mean, he joked around. Like, he knew he was talking to someone dumb when he was talking to someone dumb, and could lead them on and just show them how dumb they were. So they were...
Did he do that?
Yeah.
That's so funny. So he was cruel.
He wasn't cruel. He just played dumb and was sarcastic when maybe...
I had a thought,
when you're
actually, which is something that Cruelty seems to be very connected to play. I don't know.
Why do you say that?
Well, Well, it started like this. I try to imagine, what is it about being cruel that makes people want to be cruel? And I think it's about control. And what is it about play that makes everything so good about play? And I was trying to think in terms of that, right? So it's like, can you be cruel in a game absent of cruelty? That's what I was trying to think of it. Like, you can't be cruel in a board game where, like, if I'm playing a board game in online adaptation and there's no chat message, I'm playing and I can't be cruel. But and when I think about that, I think, do I get frustrated? Yes, but I have no avenue of expressing my frustration, of expressing that control.
You don't think in Monopoly that you could deliberately have a grudge against someone, make easy trades with one other player, and refuse to make any trades or concessions with the one you're being cruel to? You don't think
unless there's a communication where they can tell you, hey, you're doing something wrong here, and you reject them? No, I don't think that's cruel. I think it's unoptimal. That's the difference. I think cruelty has to include an element where you're in tune with what the other person is feeling. And that play also has to include an element where you're in tune with what the other person is doing. Not really
feeling? What do you...
So anyways, I feel cruel sometimes when I'm playing League. I get really mad at someone and they're not playing optimally. And I know what I could say to them to really make them feel bad about their unoptimal play. And when I think about it, it's like, that does not help me strategically, it doesn't help me do anything. It's just cruel. And it provides me an immense temporary relief. And I was trying to think about, what is that? Why? I'm not cruel. I don't like that, but it does do something to me. What is it? Well, when I'm playing League, I'm in tune with everyone, with 10 people's thoughts. Because if any one of those people are not doing something thought out, you will win the game or lose the game. It is that competitive. So you're in tune with 10 people, and you can choose to talk if you want, but most people don't really chat. You can't really type except for like when you're dead or something, right? Sure. Now there are 10 people involved. Each person generally has a game plan, a game strategy. They do something, and it's like on autopilot. They have a strategy.
Is this strategy based on the character? How does that work?
It actually is just, you don't even have to think that way. Generally, yes. There's probably not one optimal way to play League. Probably at a very high level, there are many ways to play League, and each person at a non-optimal level will still be thinking in those terms. They think we want to split push, get objectives, there's only one way to hardcore win the game. There are many ways to get advantages such that you can do that. So if I'm playing and I want to have control of the game, then just like you said, there's one way to do that, which is I'm going to sabotage the game unless you give me control. That's it. We're talking game theory now. That's something that people do in League, right? Sure. They want control. They're going to sabotage the game. They say in Champ Select, we're not winning this game unless you follow my game plan. Fair enough. Not cruel. Immature. not cruel.
Yeah.
You know, it's not cruel because unless I say to you, hey, I'm having a fun time, we have a chance to win this, you're ruining my experience, and they gain something from that, I don't think that's cruel. But if you're in a situation, because why is it not cruel? They actually want you to win at that moment. They believe they can help you win. It's a weird game theory where they don't want you to lose. They just don't care if you lose. They care if they lose, right? I'm speaking from experience as well. I don't care if my allies win or lose their next game, their previous game. I want to win this game. Actually, I don't even care about winning anymore. I want to play the best game I can play, is really what I feel. So if they're losing, feeding their mind off in the game, I don't feel anything about that. As long as I can play the best game I can play. But sometimes people decide that 10 minutes in, we don't have a chance to win anymore. We can't win, and all they care about is the next game. They want to win the next game. They want to move on from this game. They don't want to play this game anymore. So they decide, again, because all people are in tune with each other, this becomes pretty obvious soon enough. They decide they're going to purposely lose the game as quickly as possible so that we will surrender quickly, play the next game, because they don't think we can win. That's the moment where I feel like being cruel to them, because I've identified that they've given up. I know they're wrong. I know we can win this game. So I want them to feel regret over choosing to... I'll be honest, it is not... I don't believe these people do it consciously. I think these people... I mean, it's so obvious if you record your games and you look at the gameplay, the moment where support was trying, he's pinging a lot, and then he stops interacting with anyone. He goes to a different lane. You don't actually, you don't catch this every time when you're playing, but then when you look at the game and you try to understand how every person was feeling in that game, it's so obvious. It is really obvious. Because like I said, if they're not at the level that I'm playing, you're at the top 10% of players. You just lose if you don't do the right things. And everyone there has done the right things to a certain point to get there, for the most part. So sometimes people will tell you, say, I'm going to lose now. Nothing you can do about it. Sometimes they don't tell you. They just will be starting to play. You look at the screen, suddenly they have 10 deaths. And you're like, I told you to stop dying. I told you to stay here. I'm going to come down here. How'd you stop dying? Oh, they don't care about dying. In fact, dying helps their new strategy, which is I'm going to lose the game as quickly as I can. So in that moment, I feel like being cruel to them because I have no agency. And so what is that cruelty like? Well, I need them to feel regret or something bad, negative. Okay. And that, when I feel like they are feeling that, I get satisfaction because now I have control in this experience. So it's a very ugly thing, and I can identify it. I can identify it in other people's cruelty. How the way that they're feeling, how I can imagine a circumstance that maybe would have me feel the same way. So you take maybe cruelty in battle. Maybe you're fighting someone that you hate. Well, maybe you're fighting the Hamas people who have killed babies. You hate these people. And it's not... Inglourious Bastards. You watch Inglourious Bastards? You hate the Nazis. Yeah, you hate the Nazis. It's not good enough that Hans gives up at the end. We need to scalp him, put a swastika on his head. We have to do something cruel. Sure. They need to regret. Hans does not regret his actions at the end. So he needs to be cruel when he surrenders. He needs to be cruel and say, I'm going to give you something that, you can't play this off in the future. It's a weird thing. I think it's connected to play. It's connected to the sense of this mutual control we share in a game. Well, I say the reason why it's connected to play is because I think cruelty takes creativity. I don't think it's easy to be cruel. I think you have to be spirited in a creative way, and you have to be malignant. It takes a lot of these very powerful forces to be cruel. The cruelty is all over the place. So when I look at it, it comes up in play a lot. And every portrayal I see in like war, even you're fighting, it's like someone's cruel and they're like they have a smile on their face. Like, I don't know. It's such an interesting thing to me. It's interesting because when I talk to people and I ask them about prisoner, I slowly get the conversation to a point like this where I'm trying to build someone up as despicable, disgusting maybe, or
build someone up. Sorry,
I talked about prisoner very quickly. Well, I meant to say someone despicable, but I had to build it up in the conversation by saying a prisoner or someone. But let's say someone on death row who is a serial rapist and killer. And I ask you, okay, it's pretty hard to excuse like rape, but there are situations where I think a person can regret doing that. But let's say just a serial murderer. Is there a difference if he was cruel to those people he was killing, or if he wasn't cruel to those people? If he was a serial murderer who killed 12 people by sneaking into their house at night and shooting them in the head point blank and they died instantly, or he tortured them for several hours and then killed them. You feel that the person who tortured and was cruel and gained something out of that cruelty, you feel like they need judgment. I don't say I mean judges judge differently if they have cruelty.
For sure.
Very harshly. There's a huge variety in the judgment they can offer. And all of the worst judgments you see passed are when the person is still smiling in the courtroom. It's in that moment they are incapable of expressing regret. And to me, it's such a weird thing. Why is cruelty so bad? I mean, why is cruelty so bad, but mental insanity is not? They're both... is it implying that cruelty should be more controllable? It's such a weird thing to me, because when I recognize cruelty, it always makes sense when I do it. It's weird that other people don't talk about their own cruelty and like what do most people not cruel, because I'd be willing to bet what makes that person cruel, all those interconnected, all those things in their brain can probably come about in your life as well. It's just you've not been pushed into war or into hating someone. And for me, I desperately need that game of League for me to enjoy myself in life, because League is something I'm good at and I want to do something I'm good at, and it takes a long time to play. That's why I care so much when someone ruins my experience of League, and I want to ruin their experience and I want to be cruel. And then someone who's cruel at war, like maybe they hate this person. Maybe they feel like it's justified in some way.
Maybe they don't. Maybe they just... Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they didn't even do that, and they're just so conditioned at this point to be... I don't even want to say condition themselves. You could probably say
exactly.
Be a cruel person and get that satisfaction of torturing your baby before you kill it. Say.
Yes, I think that the baby thing, killing babies, is out of disgust. I think it's pretty... I mean, maybe I'm undermining the horrific nature of what these people's motives are, but babies are very vocal and very, I think it's a matter of disgust, I'd say. Like, personally, I could not kill a baby, but I can see how if you were so I would kill a baby bad. Insert something that you find cute, but I might find disgusting. Like a baby animal... Yeah, I could probably kill that if I was immensely disgusted and was used to killing, right? I can imagine how, and I do know that that's mothers that kill their own babies, for example. It's out of disgust a lot of the times, or it's out of psychosis and they feel there are a lot of things, reasons why mothers kill babies. But the ones that I've heard that have been like the most. And they express the most regret afterwards, and they can like really fix themselves. It's always where they were disgusted, and it's like they didn't understand their emotion. Like, I don't understand disgust. When I see a cockroach, I want to step on it. I don't understand what that means.
Sure.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of that would just be an innate behavioral immune system. Just cockroaches carry around a lot of diseases. So you see something that creeps and crawls on the ground, so that's activating the primal part of your brain. You think you gotta squash it, but you don't know. Like, none of that's explicit. That's all that's so primal that You just kind of do it instinctually, do it reactionally.
And I think that you have a mother and a child, and in the moment, you know you're going to kill the mother. It's like, well, why am I going to leave the child there to scream bloody hell? And I killed its mother. And, you know, you start to distance yourself from the humanity of the aspect.
Sure. Right. It becomes a job at that point. It's like
killing is already an inhumane thing. You already have a mechanism. You already have a mechanism that you can turn off your brain and not look at someone like the due respect that you need people to look at each other with.
Sure.
I just, you know, when people say, oh, like, people don't react the same. They, you know, Hamas especially.
Oh yeah.
Reacting to babies dying. Babies die in all kinds of wars. Like, that's what happens when civilians die. You know, like, I'm pretty sure the U.S. killed babies as well whenever we were in Vietnam and going to villages.
Yes.
Like, when you hear those testimonies, it's like, I don't see the difference. And, like, I don't see this. What I see is barbaric actions that happen in war. That happens in every war. I think war is an avenue for you to do pretty much anything grotesque. My understanding in I can understand these Americans. When they were doing the stuff that was really bad, it was what I was saying. It was their excuse, their testimonies of the time. It was, you know, it was easy to turn your head away, but there were men raping women, right? And men killing women, and men killing old men, and men killing death everywhere and rape everywhere, and you turn your head away from it. It's like, what's the difference between putting a child out of its misery and having it watch you take advantage of its mother? Like, there's these decisions that can happen in the moment are very different than the decisions that we're judging them for.
Sure.
You know, out of the moment. I don't know how to treat that moment. You know, I think it matters a lot if the society that they go into after whatever they do can foster a change in their heart. If they can get to even understand the regret in their action. I think if they're incapable of regret, that's one thing. And it's like, you're judging them for that. But I have a hard time, particularly because everything now has so much narrative, when really I don't think there is a reason why people kill babies. Like, I think there's a reason why people kill, and then I think it happens in the moment. But I think, you know, funnily enough, you know that Saddam Hussein wrote a lot to people?
You mean like letters?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
There is a letter that he wrote to someone that emailed him, like just emailed his email, and he wrote back like a very detailed process, and he was talking about it. And then when I was reading, like, this was on Reddit or something, and I was reading those people, and they were saying, like, oh, he's such a sob, you know, he's just writing because he's so full of himself. I'm like, I don't know. I think it's nice that he provided an avenue where he expressed that he regrets, he sympathizes with civilians. It expresses that those thoughts are influential to him. And it's not, you can't just say he doesn't really feel it, because he wrote a 12-letter response to just some random person that emailed him. Like, maybe he's doing this as a publicity stint, but then I don't think the response you should have is you neglect his momentary showcasing of humanity. I don't think that is what you do with that response. And I think, like, 9/11 is a good example where we can take, how could anyone do this to us? So it's like, well, this stuff happens all the time, but now you think about, okay, you had the avenue to do it. There was a insecurity in our airlines. They saw the opportunity. It only takes like 10 people having a moment, you know, one day of that choice to cause a lot of damage.
Oh yeah, if people have so much power nowadays that if you really wanted to, you could do a lot of damage very easily, very quickly.
I think I told you this.
It's a miracle that it doesn't happen all the time.
In a phone call, is like, I could be a serious. I'm not trying to paint this as a way of like, give me some help.
I got you.
I know that if I was malicious at heart and I wanted to cause damage, I could kill a lot of people. Yeah. I know. It is not hard. I have no crime record. I have a good job, income. I have money and resources to buy lots of guns. I could do it online. I could ask friends about it. I could probably do it within a week. I'm smart enough to know that I could cause more than one person to die. I could bring more death than someone could subject to me.
Sure.
Anyone can do that. Everyone could do that. I know how frail people are. So when we see something that like showcases how frail we are, I don't think that's a place for cruelty. I think when you see cruelty, you can't be cruel in response. I think that's what has to be tempered more in society, probably.
Why do you say that? Because what you just said, I could kill 10 people and then someone just kills me, and that's definitely imbalance. So why not take the cruel route and do the torture before the death to even the scales a little? I mean, you could make a very easy case for that, straightforward case. Even
the scales in what's in like the sense that it does to me, it does to society.
Yeah, in a cosmic sense that we need to even out the scales. You kill 10 people. If I kill you, well, there's still 9 other people who need justice. So why don't we even out the scales and make this last a little longer?
I don't know.
Can you say that? I'm not saying.
I think
I don't
is
believe in the death penalty to begin with, but I mean you could make a straightforward case.
It really just depends how society views death. What's the tragedy in 10 people dying? Is it that these 10 people had something sacred innately and that it's a tragedy to lose that? Or is it that these 10 people had great potential that was removed from them?
Sure.
And which is worse?
Their families that's been hurt as well. I mean, people are so part of their social.
Thousands of people involved in especially in a public forum, maybe it happened in a public venue. It's like thousands of people watched it happen,
Sure.
The question is, I think that when you look at life as being momentarily sacred, I can't kill you because you're sacred. I think it robs the meaning of what that divinity is. When you really think about how powerful people are, yeah, we have the power to rob it. I could probably kill 10 people in a blinking of an eye and do that, and you can't undo that. Does that make me powerful? What about that is powerful? Is it because I can remove 10 people in 1 second? Is it the delineation of life that matters, or is it what I'm robbing society of? Which one is more important? What's the lens to take? What I've been taking more, and I want to pursue it with the novel that I want to tell, is that what is your life? What is yourself? The attitude I take now is I have maybe 40 solid years of living. What can I do in those 40 years? I could go to Japan, I could go to Europe, I could go to the moon, maybe if there's travel available. I can learn to dive. I can do so much in 40 years. What I can't do is my last 20 years of life. I can't change that. So you have
the last 20 years that you just spent alive.
Right. Exactly. The tragedy of my life, if I were to kill myself or die, would not be anything related to the 20 years I lived up to now. The tragedy is losing all those possibilities in the next 40 years I have. It's still a tragedy if an old person dies. It's, if an old person gets shot, what is that?
Oh, yeah.
That, they don't have many years to offer, but it seems to imply that they have a lot to offer still. I think the fostering of relations between people is what's tragic. I think there are, if I spent the next 40 years of my life on Mars and I didn't do anything, then it's just a matter of how much did I self-relate? Did I self-preserve? And did I leave anything? Did I get anything out of it? That's easy to dictate. I'm in my own circle. I think when people take their own lives, they feel like they're on their own. It's easy for them to decide, I don't like the prospects of the future.
Right.
But when it comes to you taking another person's life,
maybe it's not, I don't like the prospects of the future, but the prospects of the future are better off if I'm not there. Exactly.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it's just, it sucks all the time. I don't like that.
Right. But there's also an aspect where it's grounded in the present too. Sure.
when it comes to taking another life, I think that it's so much more about you robbing yourself and the person you're killing of anything. You're robbing everything. You're robbing the future for both people involved, right? You rob yourself of the chance to not be a killer of when you get caught, you rob yourself of your future, literally. When you don't get caught, you rob yourself of morality and humanity, and there's a lot of things involved in taking a person's life, even if it's selfish and momentarily misguided, or maybe it's never misguided. Maybe you're always selfish and cruel. There's a sense of loss at every instance. And the response that society takes is that you now need to pay for this. I think the correct response is, well, what can we do with this now? You've taken a life. What would be the best possible future? Well, I think you have to think about what would have been the best possible future if you didn't take this person's life. Well, they could have lived on to be the next president. They could have lived on to be the next scientific discoverer of something majorly important. I think the best thing you can do now is you had two people, now you have one. You want the best person from this killer, from the perspective of the killer. You want them to still be the best person, have the best potential, and you want the families of everyone involved to have the best potential. It's like you remove a lot of the good, doesn't mean you need to start delving into the bad. I think you still, when you can't reform someone, I think that is an appropriate time to look to other people. So when it comes to prisons, it's like someone who can't reform. I think you keep them in prison so that they don't hurt anyone else. I don't think you ever go the route of, I'm going to karmically pay for my crime, because I just can't imagine. I don't see how that's helpful. I don't see how that improves anyone's life. I don't think how that ever moves the clock or the meter up. I think the whole reason why you need to address murder is because you're bringing quality of life down for everyone, literally removing life from the planet. But more importantly, I don't think a lot of people find it bad, like mercy killing is bad in war. I think that is something that's like a gray line. Why? Well, they're going to die anyways. I'm putting them out of their misery. That's a very good example of there's no retribution that needs to be done. Really. It's like there are a lot of cases like that, specifically in war, or specifically when we branch out, morally speaking, into forms of cruelty that aren't murder, like sex, for example. I think there are a lot of things that if we could have, if it was possible to have a lens beyond death, that everyone would be able to see a better approach, which is you have to think long term for as many people as possible. I think a utilitarian approach is necessary to some degree when it comes to, for example, how does a government enforce policies?
What do you mean when you say you have to think long term for people? Especially if you can do something after death. Like what? I'm just trying to figure out what you were getting at there.
I'm thinking of people who, when they discuss killers, and they always discuss them as they deserve the worst in prison, or they deserve the worst to be done. They need to pay or atone. I think in that, those people are very short-minded. I don't see how, like, when they say that and get encouragement from other people, I don't see how they're fostering anything good for anyone, right? I think it fosters a narrative that is detrimental for society. It fosters a narrative where we get instances like Hamas, where now we're overdriven by our disgust of how could they kill a baby, that we don't realize that it's a very complicated part of the world where they live a very different life than where we do. And I think the thing that's least looked on in the Hamas situation, everyone in America, most people in America have a very strong opinion, is that these people are very young. Like, the terrorist group particularly targets young men, like 18-year-olds, people that we conscript to war in a very similar way. We say, here's war, here's American culture, here's the honor of killing, in a very similar way, but it's religiously charged. So you have an element of divinity and you have an element of disgust on top of it, which are two, in my mind, probably the reason why they can go and kill babies, and also on the other hand say we're men of God, right? This seems so ridiculous to someone, like, to a Christian, like, how could you kill a baby and say and say your religion should be worshipped? Like, you're the devil's work. And I'm like, no, this is what happens when you have a really chaotic culture. Like, their culture is not much different. Their culture, they think these people deserve to die because they're heretics and they don't abide by the rules that they live by. I think if you want to contend against a culture that fosters this cruelty, you have to stop being cruel, right?
So couldn't I argue then that as a deterrent to further crime, to further terrorist attacks, we could say, all right, we're going to make an example of these guys. If you step out of line and murder children and babies and rape women, then here's all of the things here are all the ways we're going to torture you until we kill you. So don't ever step out of line, else this happens to you as well. I mean, that seems like a reasonable argument that you can make. I think that's a dangerous line to cross. I don't think the government should have that power, but nonetheless, it does seem like that's a straightforward argument to make. As a deterrent, just say...
No, I don't think it would deter anything.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think a person kills a baby under normal circumstances. I don't think any kind of deterrent strategy will speak to a kind of organization that will kill babies by the dozens.
If it were legal, though, I imagine more people would engage in it than they do now.
If what was legal? Killing
babies.
It can still be illegal. It just doesn't have to have a high deterrent.
Right. So I'm just saying that there is some level of deterrency within the framework of.
It's not legal to kill babies.
I know. I'm just saying, because it's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of people don't engage in it because they're going to be punished. Right. That punishment acts as a deterrent to some degree.
That's a very cynical approach. I don't feel like I would kill a baby. I feel like I would kick a life. A lot of the things that are supposed to deter me don't necessarily deter me in my life.
Sure. But just because it's not applicable to you doesn't mean it's not applicable to some people, and it's going to change with different crimes. Like there are probably people who would steal more if, like, a good example is the crime rates that are skyrocketing in many of the cities. It's like people aren't being prosecuted for stealing for stolen goods under $1,000 in many of the big cities. As a consequence, people are stealing all the time because they're not going to be prosecuted for it. So if there is no punishment for something, then there's no deterrent, so crime goes up. If you can take that, then it's a bit of a jump to say thievery is the same as murdering someone, but I don't think it's that much of a jump, given that we do seem to say that is wrong and we do make them illegal. There is a level of deterrency.
So, yes, like, if you were to keep the lens specifically to cruelty, I want to prevent cruelty. The question is, am I concerned about theft? I think business owners are concerned about theft. I think governments are mildly concerned about theft, but I think governments should be majorly concerned about cruelty. Like, I think that's a separate problem. I think people steal for two reasons: because they genuinely need something, or because they're good at stealing and they know they can get away with it.
You don't think it's also something, I want that, so I want to take it? Like a laptop or something like that?
No. I think, like, most people recognize they wouldn't get away with it.
But in these cases where you just won't be prosecuted for stealing the phone, like, it seems reasonable that people will just do it. Like, there's no punishment whatsoever for stealing.
There will always be, like, there's an improportional amount of phones and people willing to steal them. Like the people willing to steal them and not get prosecuted will just keep doing it until they get caught or prosecuted. Like it takes one person to break a system like that. I think that's why I wanted to separate it. Is like then you would have to have repeat offenses, and you would have to take into account. You have to take into account a lot of things because some people are pathological stealers. Sure. Does that make them a bad person? I don't know. I think that means if they steal a lot and they are open about not knowing why they steal, they probably need like therapy and stuff. I don't think unless they're cruel. I think cruelty is something that is particularly hard to describe, and it's particularly always antagonistic. Like people always find a reason to like kill someone for being cruel, like in public discussion, public policy, right?
Well, I mean, cruel to some degree. I mean, you were talking about being cruel in a video game. I don't imagine people would want to kill you for that.
No, I agree. I think cruelty is more in. I think people pretend like they're not cruel when really I don't think it takes a lot for you to be cruel, you know?
I don't think so either.
Like,
people like to think that they'd be Schindler hiding Anne Frank under the
and I see like bullying is a form of cruelty. Like it's well understood like why bullies bully. You know, it's well studied, I should say. But then what do you pretend like adults don't have the same sensations? Like it is different, but
that's a good point. I don't think people think about that.
And they're bullies. Adults are bullies all the time, and then all that society says is that they're an asshole. They don't ever call them cruel. They don't ever treat them like the cruel person who kills a baby. When really, I think there's not too many steps away from that. I think the biggest difference is that we're disgusted by the other form of cruelty. And that disgust comes from this idea that life is sacred and that babies are especially innocent. There's no way you can construe a baby as being worthy of death. And that's why I think when you look at tragedy, you have to take an objective sense. So what you were saying about maybe our objective approach is we're going to try to deter cruelty. We're going to try to make something, the payment for cruelty, eye for an eye. You do something cruel, you have something cruel done to you.
It doesn't necessarily have to be an eye for an eye, but something in proportion to their crime so that more crime akin to that isn't committed in the future. You could take a utilitarian approach.
Yes. I would say that is a great slippery slope. It is a solution. It is a solution that might work. It's a solution that takes a lot of resources to be sure it's working, a lot of documenting and studies, and otherwise you're just taking an easy approach. Like literally, it takes a lot more to try to reform someone and make sure that's working than it does to just kill someone and deter. And I've not been compelled personally by deterrence strategies, not been deterred to do things I shouldn't do. I watch interviews of serial killers, like the ones that turn themselves in, the ones that you would want to have support for. And those people always will talk about how it didn't matter. It didn't matter the repercussions. They were broken people. Like it didn't matter. One serial killer I know of particularly, he just had something wrong with him. He, for years, had been thinking about, he wasn't even a serial killer, he was just a killer. He had this impulse, he didn't understand it, it was cruel, and when he did it, he turned himself in, and then he got a confession, and then he spent life in prison, you know? It's like, yeah, that seems about the best you can do with that process. Like I said, everyone has an immense potential to cause immense damage. Yeah. So we can, there is no way to stop him. We can't stop selling guns. He's just going to use a knife in a more brutal method, and he's going to kill a child who's vulnerable, right? There's no method to prevent this immense possible cruelty that can exist in the world. I think the only effective method is going to be making sure you're doing your part to limit how much cruelty is spread, and making sure society diminishes that cruelty, the need for cruelty. I think what you've said there is, well, as we meet more and more cruelty, we're going to need more and more cruel methods to keep up. Because, well, what if I kill 50 babies? Does that mean I need to be tortured for 2 more hours, or
Sure. Yeah.
what effect, maybe I've already gone through the deterrence. Well, now I might as well kill as many babies as I want. It's like, maybe I'm a serial killer. It's like, if I ever get caught, I'm gonna get put to prison, so I might as well move to another country and start setting up shop there. Like, there are so many ineffective parts of that reasoning, because it's not a matter of reasoning, it's a solution. You're right, it's a solution that might work. I don't think it works for the people that do this level of damage. Like, specifically Hamas, I don't think it works for children. I don't think children will be deterred. And really, when you get situations like in Hamas, there are like anywhere from 15-year-olds to 18-year-olds being brainwashed, and I'm telling you, it's like, my understanding of what it might be like for one of those people is they lived their whole life. I mean, from 2000, like the same age as us, let's take it. So their whole life, they've been raised, and there's been 4 different similar occasions since 2000 to now of killings or invasions of Hamas or Israel, bombings, nightly concern about that situation. And they feel like Israel is the aggressor. They're the ones with lots of money from America. Palestine doesn't even have a place. The Palestinians are more associated by their language and culture than any local region. They don't have a region or a government, right? And now you have an organization that appeals to you, says you can be in control of this. You can help you and your brethren rise up against the Israelites, that are not in the right place. It's like, this is the narrative they're being spoon-fed. A lot of it is not cruel. A lot of it is they're sacrificing the easy life, the quote-unquote easy life, the life where they don't do harm, to possibly get a better future. It's like, okay, that's the lens that now, in the moment they go into war, they're literally running into bombs because all they have are guns. It's like, yeah, they're going to kill civilians so that they have a place that's what's going to happen. There's no way that there are no tactic other than really gruesome tactics that they can get a lead on in this war. That's why it's not a war. That's why Israel right now, supposedly, is doing lots of bombings, irregardless, not regarding really who they're attacking. It's like, that's also a very natural response that Israel said they're going to do. It's like, this has been the case for years. But now, people on Reddit, or, Reddit's all I consume, but people that you talk to as well, like Palestinians in America, or Jewish people in America, particularly have strong opinions in this matter. They'll say it like, America needs to go to war. They need to do this. You need this opinion. Babies are on the line. It's like, they were babies on the line 10 years ago. They just lived a longer life, right? A more tragic life, honestly, when you think about the circumstances.
When you say babies on the line 10 years ago, what exactly are you getting at?
I'm alluding to the fact that anyone born on that border is a desperate baby. Is a baby that was vulnerable and was maladapted, right?
But that's not the same thing as going in and torturing and killing babies.
Right. I think that going in and torturing and killing babies is the headline. I think what happened was, probably in the battle plans, is we're going to go into this area and we're going to kill everyone, civilians and militants alike. And then when you have babies, they don't have resources to take those babies anywhere. If they go and bring the babies to a safe harbor, they're going to get shot or arrested. So what are they going to do? They don't have any place. Actually, they do have hospitals, and they did bring civilians to hospitals. So I don't actually know why they didn't bring I think probably what happened actually was that, and this tends to happen in circumstances like this, one person probably killed a baby because they were disgusted. They felt disgust for that baby. And then it became a thing that was more easy to ignore than to report or stop, right? My understanding, because you also had a lot of babies dying in the Rwandan genocide, and if it wasn't babies, it was 6-year-olds being torn apart, right? And when that started, it started at multiple places. It wasn't organized, but it was strategized. So they gave broadcasts that were alluding to violence.
In Rwanda, not
in Rwanda, yes. And these were civilians against civilians, right? Two different ethnicities, basically. And the Rwandans, they learned by radio that this was now happening. Right? You now need to go in and take, it's very much like how people in America see Jews as taking over businesses. They saw the one ethnicity of Rwandans as taking over the mercantile class.
Sure.
So they felt like it was deserved to go and trash their businesses. And they were given like machetes to break open and hammers and everything. Now they're in, and now the business owner is defending themselves, but they don't have weapons, and you have weapons. So you kill a person, you kill them. And you're like, well, I need to go and do this to everyone. I need to go and destroy everyone's properties for us to get rid of this mercantile class. And these are like these are like 16-year-olds who are wielding machetes and tearing apart people. They're not reasoning. They're not human. The reasoning was never human reasoning. They never thought these are people that are humans that are taking advantage of their situations so that they can build a successful life. It's always been the narrative of these people are devils. The Jewish or Nazi propaganda was they would mark the Jewish people as a way of degrading them, and saying, oh, here's where, swine live, basically. That's what it equates to. Or here's where the devils, I think they call Jewish people devils as well. That's the same, if you hear a Palestinian who actually supports Hamas, and if they find a way to approve of what they're doing, they'll always use it like that context. Like they'll always first say Israel is not innocent. They do terrible things.
Sure.
And then after that, they'll say it's not innocent the way America is funding Israel. They'll always give all the context for what makes Palestinian life terrible. Then they'll say, yes, people did awful things, but it was expected and it's needed. And if it's expected and needed, it's going to happen, right? That's how they view it. That discussion, their attitude actually makes a lot more sense to me than the American attitude of I'm outraged over this thing that I don't really know a lot about. I don't know a lot about. I'll ask someone who's outraged, can you tell me more about the information? They can't tell me any more information about what the civilians were like what were those civilians doing?
Does it even matter though? I mean, going in and killing innocent people seems like a line that neither side should cross. One side did cross it, then it seems reasonably outraged for it.
Matter in the sense of what is America going to do now, or what is Israel going to do now?
Setting aside what America.
I don't think outrage does anything. I think the most outrage has done in my spectating of the outrage has been it gives a call to more cruelty. So I see people saying those Hamas militants need to be worse than put to death. They need the worst done to them because they killed a baby. I said, well, I don't know. I don't feel that way. It's hard for me to feel that way because it's not a deter in those people's minds. There's nothing you can do to deter that activity. I don't understand the reasoning because it's not a deterrent for them. I'll put it this way: I wouldn't do that if I felt like it was a deterrent. So either they don't believe you're going to do it, or they're not actually possibly ever deterred by death. These are actual terrorists that are willing to die for their cause, right? What's the narrative to fix that? I think the best way to fix that is to attack the ideology. Really dig into what their ideology is and really show how this is not a proper ideology. I think that is a good way for society to fuel its outrage, is to really look how could you even think this way, right? But I think that's stepping on lines. People don't want to do that because they're afraid of attacking an ideology that people actually support. So instead, I'm not going to say they victimize the perpetrator, but they throw all the outrage on the perpetrator as if they're a person in a void. They're not. They're not a baby killer. They're not the same as a serial killer in America who decides, I like killing babies. I'm going to go around and kill lots of babies. think that person is scarier and should be more. There should be more outrage on, and that they obviously are cruel. But from my understanding of war, it's situationally almost everyone. I mean, majority of people in war show cruelty. Like it is a natural response. It is a very hard thing to constrain yourself. From my understanding of lots of war, there's cruelty, there's rape in every war. There is, like rape is the one that makes me think cruelty is is at play. I think that you don't rape a person without making them inhumane. You don't make a person inhumane unless you get something out of it. It's like it's such a clear self-serving disregard of a person's agency for pleasure, for entertainment. Rape is. Killing is not necessarily that case, but the point is, like, I've never been in war. I think for me to be in war and to kill someone, I'd be cruel. Like, I would be, to be a killer, to defend myself, I would have to be cruel, good at killing. I would have to, and there would be a lot at play with enjoying being good at killing for me to be good at war. Like, and that we have a very modern sense of war. War has historically been, like, even more chaotic and even more like driven by necessity. Like when I think of, really that's what I feel of like Imperial Japan, what it has to have been in like hit throughout ancient history. Throughout history, your nation was really your people. Like you were very different from other nations. Nowadays, you have open borders and planes, and you find people all over the place. There's a sense of a global identity and human rights and whatnot. Before that, it was like, what did the Mongolians think of the Chinese, right? Like,
I can't testify to the East because I don't know enough about the East. But when you're thinking a citizen of the world, so I'll wrap it up at this point and you can respond if you want. When it comes to a citizen of the world, the first, I think it's Diogenes who's the first person to use the word cosmopolitan, the equivalent. So cosmos. World.
Diogenes, does his name also mean through?
No. That's actually in reference to Zeus. That's a reference to God, actually. Again,
how can you tell? Is it based off of the morph? Are you breaking apart the morphemes there? Do you know what morpheme is?
Yeah. I'm breaking down. I guess you could guess the morphemes. They're different words. So the Diogenes would be Dio, as in reference to Zeus, as in reference to God, and then Genes would be that which is begotten, something like that. It's not like godlike, something like that. He uses the word cosmopolitan. Cosmos, world, good order. Politan, polity, polis, citizen of the world, cosmopolitan. That's really what he's getting at with that. And then to the point of it wasn't there in yesteryear. It's really in Christianity where that starts to come about. Bring the way I think of Christianity is something like the confluence between Hellenic Greece and Judaism. So you can look at it through the lens of the Gospel of Luke, where taking the Gospel of Matthew,
I haven't read the Gospel of Luke.
The Gospel of Matthew is kind of like the Jewish New Testament. The Gospel of Luke is kind of like the cosmopolitan New Testament. And the letter to the Romans from Paul kind of built on that, as well as building Christianity into a Gentile Christianity rather than a Jewish Christianity, a worldwide, Gentile just being outsider, a worldwide Christianity that everyone's included, not just God's chosen people. So I think it's in part Hellenic going into the Christian that you start to have citizen of the world.
Wow, was gentleman probably came from the word Gentile? Gentile men?
No, I doubt it. I don't know where Gentile comes from, but I bet that's gentle, genteel, bet it's nice, something like that. I don't know Gentile though. Gentile is like outsider.
Yeah, Gentile is like class.
Persian or something like that. It's a people.
Oh.
Gentiles. Yeah.
I thought the Gentile was like the Gentile class, like the high up, fancy class.
Gentry? No.
Gentry. Oh, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. I don't know where Gentile comes from. We could look it up later if you want.
You were asking about cosmopolitan. What was the context?
Yeah, you were saying with airplanes that we're citizens of the world now. I think that at least goes back to Diogenes.
Let's see. I think just like we have immense agency causing destruction, we have immense agency to unwinding the world. I can go to Japan, learn all about Japanese culture. I could spend 10 years doing that. That is something that is afforded to us. So that's if you were to think, I don't think about death like this, really. I think about death as very meaningless. I think the best way to think about death is like it doesn't matter. Like, you leave behind enough for other people that they can still be with you, right? I think that's the purpose of legacy, and really defining yourself is so that you can be remembered and you're not lost when your molecules fall apart. And that's why I asked you a little bit about my attitude when it comes to asking you for, do you think knowledge needs to be earned? I think knowledge exists. I think there are things that you can ascertain. It's a measure of procedure and resources, right? But I think the way I view the mind and the way I view the body has really been expanded. I think it is you're very much, I give people a lot of agency. Like, as long as you have probably average IQ and the technology that we do and the resources that as an American you can reasonably foster, there's more that you can learn in life than you will be able to keep up with, right? There's too much. I think there are too many perspectives that are valid. I think there are too many opinions you can have which are compatible. Like, it doesn't take a lot of thought to make a meaningful life, really. I think we have so much luxury because of that. So when it comes to knowledge, it's very much how you define what's your relationship with knowledge. A lot of people, they don't have this relationship where knowledge is vital, where truth is vital. I think it's one thing to say you need to be closer to truth. Like, I need to be more honest. I need to be more honest with myself, with other people. It's hard for me to say that is definitely the case for everyone. I think that part of being a more global world is realizing the immense diversity that comes with the way people live their lives. Some people live very simple lives, and I think a lot can be learned from them. Do they possess knowledge, or do I possess knowledge in venturing into uncovering that? Does knowledge exist outside of either of us going down that route? Interests of mine like cosmology, there are truths about the universe that just, they are true. What is the worth of uncovering those truths? Is it worth hundreds of thousands of man hours, lots of government funding? Is it worth people dying over? Is preserving the Holy Land worth dying over? Like, those are completely different perspectives, different avenues for truth and knowledge and appreciation. Really, where I would like to get to, I'd like everyone to get to, is a point where death doesn't define them, really. Like, when they die, it's not an impactful thing. That everything that they supported in life, the charities, the children, the ideals, they still are supported because of them. Death is really a goal. You want to die in such a way that your legacy lives on. And the story that I have would be interested in making, I make that literally the case. You don't die after death. The idea of reincarnation is supposed to, I think, alleviate this concept of death. It says, reincarnation for Buddhism, for example, they believe life is suffering, that you want to reach nirvana, that you'll keep reincarnating until you reach nirvana, where you continue this endless cycle of suffering. And I think that's a matter of perspective. I think some people, they don't think of their lives as suffering, but when they face cruelty, they don't realize that's what suffering is. You know, that cruelty comes because we're tied to living in death. Like, we need to be in control. I think that because of our agency, when you recognize your ability to be cruel and you recognize your ability to cause a lot of destruction, you also recognize the ability to not do any of those things and be the good saint, right? I think what drives me to want to understand more people is I want to leave behind a legacy that is appreciated by everyone. That's not really feasible, but you know, it doesn't matter if it's feasible or if it does good or it does bad. None of those things really matter to the way that humans interact. All it matters is it motivates me. And I think as I learn more and more about the world and about myself, my motivations will co-align with the things that matter to other people. And that's what we call good and bad and evil. But, you know, tying it back into our discussion of cruelty, when you're able to take away from a human, from a terrorist is a very valuable person to learn mindset from, because that's like the most extreme example of a person you can't impact, right? A terrorist is someone who has decided that the only way they can get their control in life is through terror. They need to terrorize. Are those people innately bad? It's like, goes back to the idea of what is knowledge, what's their actions. I have a very weak feeling of free will. I think a lot of their choices in life are driven by their upbringing and their circumstances. I can't control those things. I can control what I do with their legacy, though. Like, okay, we don't want more terrorism in the world. How do we get to a point where every terrorist on their deathbed, they realize regret? They know they could have made a better world. You show them. You show them what the better world is. You show them change. You listen to the things that they're saying that are actually wrong and you actually need to fix. Like, they're raising some good points, even though they're the most terrible of people killing babies. Why can't we just focus on the shred of decency that they have instead of casting them down and making a mockery of our own decency, right? That's what I see in society all the time. It doesn't have to be a baby killer. That's just the most evident. You'll see when a celebrity does something foolish. It's like, oh, they lose their fan base. It's like, why? Well, they wanted to speak out, you know, about the American flag or you know, I'm trying to take something that's not like misguided. But, you know, you have someone involved in a scandal, right? And I think you can still look at the good they provided and say, well, would it have been better if they were this person minus this bad trait? That's the legacy they live behind. They'll never be that person that they could have been. They've lost their potential already. I think if you want them to realize and regret that and motivate other people to not do that, that needs to be the focus. What you've lost as a human, you've lost your decency. You've not lost your humanity. You don't ever lose that, right?
Sure.
So I think that's where the discussion needs to go. We need more humility, in every regard. Like Gandhi, he talks about peace, and people are like, oh, he's a pacifist. He was a very humble person. Is I think his best trait. He sent a letter also after 9/11, or actually he sent a letter to Hitler. I think is a great example during the Nazi trying to, you know, no one wanted to talk with Nazi. Everyone hated Hitler. He's the most despicable person you can imagine. Gandhi still humbled himself and wrote Adolf Hitler, I think, multiple letters saying you don't have to do this. You've lost your decency, but you don't have to keep doing it. You can stop right here. You know, he showcased what it's like to be humble and what that can do. And then people mocked his letter they sent to Hitler because it was like, oh, you're not taking the right method. You're not killing people to you know, the method that you were talking about, basically. You're not deterring it. Well, no. And he probably wasn't doing anything that was helpful, but he was showcasing what it's like to be humble. That's something I think eventually we have to realize when is appropriate to apply. I say all these things, but at the same time, I recognize my own flaws, which is none of the things I say are resolute, right? At my worst, I falter in my mindset. But what motivates me to keep going forward every day is knowing that I can be humbled by the experiences. And I guess that is, I think when it comes to the cosmopolitan discussion, the idea that everyone is interconnected is a great way to humble oneself, because you can realize you're not much different than these people. Even though we are extremely different in behavior, there is something interconnecting us. And it's up to me to humble anything that denies us that connection, because that's where being a worldly Christian, that's where spreading the truth, that's where it's rooted. Whatever is the small thing that is common in all of us. I think you believe everyone is commonly sacred, their life is sacred. I don't think that's the case. I don't think living is sacred. Dying is a tragedy, really. I think what is common about everyone, very more easy to accept in my mind than this being sacred, the sacredness of life, is you just have to admit all of us have a great potential to cause harm. That's something that's in common. It's harder to admit we all have a great potential for good. I think it's easy to identify how great your potential was the longer you live. That's why older people are wiser, right? Because it's like when I was a kid, the same age that people are considering committing a revolution in many timelines throughout history, when I was just a teenager, I had no conception of my self-worth. I did not view myself as a person who was worthy of anything. The best I could do was maintain cruelty, because when I was cruel at that age, I had agency. It didn't matter that I didn't have worth or self-worth. I had control. So I was a bully when I was little, right? And bullies all feel that way. They don't have control typically when they go home. And they don't understand it, but they do understand that they feel in control when they're making someone cry and feel miserable, right? Now I realize how worthy I would have been if I was a decent person in high school. How, if I had never lost my innocence, how much better I would have been, how much more decent. But I'm still human, as human as I would have been regardless. So that's where I realize now the power in my choices, and I can't take back the 20 years that I put in already, but I can very vividly imagine what it would be like to become a successful author, or to see you become a successful podcast person, or anything, all these things. I have a great imagination, so it's not hard for me. Some people do struggle to see themselves in that same light, but for me, it's actually those moments of deep regret, of tragedy, of cruelty, that provide that perspective of understanding why you shouldn't be cruel, or why you shouldn't make regrets.
Sure, that notion that you have to look into the abyss to find the light. That's almost a human universal. That
yeah,
you have to look
and into. I don't know if you have to or not. I think some people do. It is a necessary part. It's like they didn't have the resources, like I was alluding to. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of technology in America, I should say. I didn't have everything that I needed, and I didn't know what to do with that lack of resources. I don't know what better resources could have been available for me to not have gone through hardship to understand my self-worth. But, I don't think that's the focus. I think the focus is now I know that I have self-worth. I think that most people have very diverse avenues to understanding themselves. Some do it through God, and some it happens on their deathbed. So that's something that's harder for me to say. It's a cosmopolitan, it's a human response. I think some cultures actually do foster that better. I think Chinese culture especially fosters, Japanese culture, for example, fosters really good mannerisms because it has a really strong fostering of shame. I don't think there's as nearly as much shame involved in American culture as there is in Japanese culture. That has ramifications on how you view yourself and what your self-worth is. Japanese people view themselves more co-aligned with other people. American people view themselves more isolated.
Yeah, that's part of American individualism, that you want to be yourself, that you don't care what other people think, and that you don't want to judge other people. So there's less of a reason to feel shame if you're not going to be socially outcast as a consequence of acting awkwardly or whatnot.
No, it's actually something treasured now because you're special.
Right. Exactly.
Or I don't even say it's treasured as in like it can actually be commercially successful if you're different, because maybe you pull an audience that way.
Right. You get a reality TV show around you and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, dude. You want to call it quits here?
Well, okay, do you want an ending? You want to do your weird sneeze or something as to close off?
No, we can just end on that note that I have this weird sneeze now.
All right, I don't think you did it. I do it as well.